I want to talk about 4 Gospels, 1 story. And the reason I'm doing that is because people are often surprised that we've got 4 accounts of what Jesus did in the Bible. Sometimes people come to me and say, why do we only have 4 accounts? Surely there were lots of other accounts. And you're absolutely right, there were. But we're looking for authentic accounts. That's what we really need. And we can be absolutely certain that the accounts that we have are authentic. I know some people think that the gospel message must have changed because it doesn't quite fit in with their ideas. But I'm absolutely confident that what we have is what was written by those who were actually right there with Jesus. And of course, you know, everyone who was around at that time would have witnessed something of Jesus. And they'd all have had their own stories to tell. And we know that with eyewitnesses' accounts, that even the eyewitness stories vary because some remember this and some remember that. And so it's great just having 4 records because you can get a really full picture. And they don't contradict each other, which is incredible. Sometimes it talks about 2 people when another gospel might talk about 1, but then it's probably there were 2 there and 1 was dominant. And this is just the way eyewitnesses remember stories. And 3 of those gospels are actually written as eyewitness accounts. 2 by people that were right there at the time, because I actually believe that Mark's gospel, you can see the evidence there that Peter was very much behind that gospel. And, you know, you can just tell when you're reading it that he's prepared to include all his mistakes. It's not like one of these books where someone's trying to write themselves up big. They're just trying to be honest about themselves in relation to being absolutely honest about Jesus. And we see Peter behind Mark's gospel, but in Matthew, we've got someone who was said to be taking the records. And of course, Matthew was a tax collector, so he would have known how to write, and he probably did take notes as they were traveling around. But I think actually that a lot of the material that occurs commonly across the Gospels probably comes from Mark, because they say that his Greek wasn't quite as good as some of the others, and so, you know, it improves in some of the other Gospels, so that you can see it wasn't bad copying but good copying that was improving on the original. But we need to move on, because really all I'm just talking about is 2 of the writers. I'm talking about Mark with Peter behind him. I'm talking about Matthew, who kept the record. But then there's Luke who got inspired about Jesus as he was traveling with Paul, and as a Gentile he wants to have a record of what Jesus said and did in a way that's relevant for those who haven't come from a Jewish background. And so he's a researcher. Yeah, he's a doctor, he's a medical doctor, but also desperately keen to find out everything. So as you read, you think, this man went and had a conversation with Mary. He got some information that some of the others missed because she was holding it in her heart. And when you begin to see some of these things, you just realize we are so blessed with what we have. And it's so good that we've got these different perspectives. So we've got Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then what about John? Well, John actually writes his gospel in a different way from the others. He's writing it specifically so that people will come to believe in Jesus. And he takes the 7 statements where Jesus says, I am the way, I am the gate. Those I am statements. He takes those, and he also takes 7 of the miracles, which he calls signs, and he builds his gospel around that. And you know that God's inspiring it, because you just know that much as John obviously loves working with 7s, it's the same in the book of Revelation, you know that it's God who's inspiring it all the way through and causing him to remember. Now, let's just think about this, because the Gospels originally came from an oral tradition in some ways, in that when the 3,000 people got saved on the day of Pentecost, they wanted to hear from the apostles daily, really, everything that they could learn from the 12 who'd been with Jesus, who'd heard how Jesus interpreted things, interpreted the Old Testament scriptures, who knew about the miracles that Jesus had done and knew about his teaching. And so when they'd got that expectation on the 12 would have to teach daily. And the Holy Spirit was actually, as Jesus had promised them, bringing things back to their remembrance. So in those days when they were teaching in Solomon's porch, as we read about it in the book of Acts, they're actually beginning to set out really clearly before everyone the things that we ultimately end up with in the Gospels. And it's just incredible. It's great that we've got this record, but it is the one story. It's the one story of all that Jesus came to do, how he lived amongst us, how he spoke, so that we know the person he is, we know the life he led, and we know that the power in that life was a resurrection life. Because even when Lazarus was being raised from the dead, he was able to say, I am the resurrection. So what we see is the story of Jesus living his life out, and then we see him laying his life down. And that's there in the Gospels, how on the cross he laid down his life for us, cried out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And between the four Gospels, you actually see very clearly all the things that Jesus said on from the cross. If it hadn't been for each of the writers, we might have missed something, but by God's grace, we've got it all. And that's just so incredible. So why four Gospels? Well, we've got four really accurate ones that together give us the full picture. What about those others that people claimed were Gospels? Well, actually, there became a little bit of a pattern of writing what was called tribute literature, where you were trying to big up the celebrities of the day. So people wrote Gospels about Jesus that went into areas which were fanciful. Talked about Jesus throwing stones up as a child and they became birds, or healing people before his actual public ministry began. And you know, when you're looking at those, that you just have to step back a little bit and just be glad that we've got ones that are so well authenticated. And do you know, the fact that they wrote these up on paper that wasn't going to last forever meant that they were constantly being copied by the most accurate of copyists, so that we can be confident that what we have is something that goes right back to the very things that were being said and taught in Solomon's porch after the day of Pentecost. We have the record of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And then moving on from that, of course, we've got the resurrection and the outpouring of the Spirit and the transformation of individuals and the coming together of the church. So let's be glad we've got four Gospels, but let's also realize it's one story, one really accurate story, collected, checked, and set out in a way that can inspire us and thrill us as we hear those different perspectives from four very different people writing slightly different audiences. Matthew to a Jewish audience, I think Mark to an audience that was probably in a little bit of a hurry, wanted to get the story through and get the main points. Luke writing to the Gentiles, and John writing to anyone with an open heart who wants to know the story of God's redemption. So, four Gospels, but one incredible story.